They actually did a survey and an official survey, and like they published a research paper on the results asking OBGYN residents. So these are MDs now. They've finished medical school. They're in their residency and specializing in OBGYN. And the majority of them did not have substantial education in prenatal nutrition. And even dietitians, I don't want to hate on dietitians, I am one, but we don't get a lot of training in prenatal nutrition.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Birth Lounge podcast. Guys, it is finally here, our Black Friday sale. This is only one of 2 sales that we run every single year, and it's finally here. I'm so excited to share it with you. You can now get $150 off of your lifetime membership to the Birth Lounge. We run sales at Black Friday and Mother's Day, and that is it. Until the 28th, you will be able to save mega time on your lifetime membership of the Birth Lounge. Let me give you a little rundown about what makes the Birth Lounge so special. It is literally unhinged. It is like nothing else you're gonna find out there on the market, and that is the way that we are able to have the results that we have. We have people that literally walk away with absolutely zero birth trauma, and they achieve all of their birth goals, and they have no tearing. They push for less than 30 minutes, and the best one yet is that we have just a 3% C-section rate. Yeah, I am able to help you truly go into the hospital system, navigate the conversations with your provider, stay in control from start to finish, and avoid unwanted interventions and unnecessary things like an unnecessary C-section or an unnecessary induction. So how can this be? Well, I'm teaching you the control method, which is going to help you understand all of the aspects of labor that are within your control, and then we're going to teach you how do you control them. The problem that I find with a lot of traditional childbirth ed classes is that they just teach you your options. They say, well, you can have this or you can have that, and these are what your options are. But then when you get in the hospital system, you find that you're getting pushback from staff, or you are feeling like you don't really have those options, or maybe you're feeling pressured and you don't know how to navigate those conversations. That's exactly what I teach you how to do. I'm deconstructing all of those barriers, those road bumps, those things that hold you up from actually achieving your goals, because just knowing your options is not enough. The Birth Lounge is a comprehensive course. So when you go with the Birth Lounge, you will not need any other form of preparation when it comes to preparing for your birth. Inside the Birth Lounge, you are going to learn stages of labor, the ins and outs of navigating the hospital system, how to engage in respectful collaborative conversation with your medical team, pain relief options, labor positions, pushing positions, how to reduce tearing, how do you avoid things like induction, C-section, and unnecessary interventions? And finally, how do you advocate for your goals so that you can say yes to the things that matter to you, you can request alternatives when that's appropriate, and you can decline things that don't feel good to you. Plus, in the lifetime membership, you're going to get free access to our Dad Days course, which is a comprehensive course made for male partners to help them understand how can they best support you in pregnancy? What is their role in labor and delivery? How do they advocate for you? How can they keep you comfortable and provide pain relief during the birth experience? And then finally, what is their role in postpartum, and how do they help you navigate this new space of becoming a mom in the best way possible. You're also going to get access for free for our secret sauce to pushing. This is where I teach you how to achieve those results I talked about in the beginning. Pushing for less than 30 minutes, avoiding tearing, and really understanding what muscles to engage to properly push your baby out. First of all, your pelvic floor does not push your baby out. That lady needs to yield out of the way. So what muscles do you use? That's exactly what I'm teaching you in the secret sauce to pushing. And yes, I'm teaching you how to push with an epidural and without an epidural. Don't worry, I don't really care how you birth your baby. I want you to be equipped no matter what pops up in your labor, because this is your birth. I want you to choose how you want to do it. My job is to make sure that no matter what choice you make, you feel empowered in doing that. You're also going to get one of my number one downloads, which is our scripts for advocacy. This is an entire packet of the most common conversations that you're going to face in labor and in the end of pregnancy that often start you down this slippery slope of handing over your control. Not only do I provide you with the evidence to have these conversations, but I'm actually giving you the words to have these conversations, i.e. the scripts for advocacy. In addition to that, you're going to get all of my PDF guides, partner guides, epidural guides, induction cheat sheets, and my brand new Birthing Your Big Ass Baby course, where I step you through the actual data of truly evaluating whether your baby is going to be quote unquote big or not. What does ACOG say? What does the AAP say? And what are the true medical recommendations when it comes to suspected macrosomia, i.e. a big baby? I think you might be surprised to learn that less than 1% of all babies in the US are born truly meeting the criteria for macrosomia. So why are inductions and C-sections so common? Well, that's exactly what I'm teaching you in the Birthing Your Big Ass Baby course, and I'm going to teach you how you can decline those if they don't feel aligned to you. And finally, probably my favorite perk of the lifetime membership is you get a box that is handpicked by me, curated to help you have your best birth possible. This is a birth box that includes all of my favorite things, not only that I have used for the last 10 years to help women achieve their best birth, but the same tools that I'm using in my own birth. Things like a TENS unit, a rebozo, a comb for pain relief, self-care items, breastfeeding items, and so much more. One of my favorite things is actually the fuzzy socks. I love them. They're so soft. Oh my gosh. This box is packed with goodies. It's worth over $120, and I'm sending it to you because I want you to be equipped to have the absolute most glorious and joyous birth experience that you possibly can. And I know that you can't do that without having the proper tools. And so not only do I teach you how to use those in the birth lounge, but I'm gifting them to you because I want them to be part of your birth bag. So for 5 days only, on November 24th through the 28th, you will be able to take advantage of our lifetime membership and $150 off. You can visit thebirthlounge.com/join to take advantage of this special Black Friday deal. Again, 5 days only, November 24th through the 28th, using code BF25 at thebirthlounge.com/join. Again, that code is BF25, 5 days only, thebirthlounge.com/join. Do not miss out on this. If you miss this sale, you'll have to wait till Mother's Day. I genuinely cannot wait to help you have your best birth possible. I'll see you in the lounge. Bye. Now on to today's episode. Let's talk about gestational diabetes. Ugh, I know. Listen, gestational diabetes is on all of our minds, and it's something that we all really desperately hope that we don't get diagnosed with. But what happens if we do get diagnosed with it? And what about the actual diagnostic criteria? Is it reliable? Is it standard? Is it the same from hospital to hospital? And what does the evidence actually say about carbohydrate limitations when you get diagnosed with gestational diabetes? And what's with all the debate around this? Today, I am joined by Lily Nichols, who is a registered dietitian and nutritionist, certified diabetes educator, researcher, and author with a passion for evidence-based nutrition. Enough said. Lily's work is known for being research focused, thorough, and sensible. Those three things almost never happen within mainstream medicine, not altogether at least. She is the founder of the Institute for Prenatal Nutrition, co-founder of the Women's Health Nutrition Academy, and the author of 3 books: Real Food for Pregnancy, Real Food for Gestational Diabetes, and Real Food for Fertility, which is co-authored by Lisa Hendrickson Jack, who you can hear on episode 230, all about optimizing your fertility with fertility awareness method. Lily's best-selling books have helped tens of thousands of mamas and babies, are used in university-level maternal nutrition and midwifery courses, and they have even influenced prenatal nutrition policy internationally. You can check out all of her work at lilynicholsrdn.com, which we will link in the show notes for you. In today's episode, I'm going to really be asking Lily all about the ins and outs about gestational diabetes so that you can truly stay in control of the decisions that are made around this when it comes to not only testing and diagnostic, but how do you manage it if you do get diagnosed with gestational diabetes. We're going to talk about the testing methods and wearing a CGM or continuous glucose monitors. The veggies first approach that has really taken off in the last couple years. And what does the data say about walking after meals? Does it truly balance your blood sugar enough to impact whether you might or might not get diagnosed with gestational diabetes? I also want to know, how do hospitals determine their cutoff for diagnosis? And what you should be asking your provider about these thresholds. Of course, we're going to dive into things like how uncontrolled versus well-managed gestational diabetes can affect long-term health outcomes for both mom and baby. I also want to understand the role of protein, fat, and fiber and how these play into stabilizing blood sugar during pregnancy. Plus, what are some of the most common misconceptions about food and gestational diabetes that Lily wishes every mom knew? This episode is not only packed with a ton of data, but also a plethora of actionable steps that you can take to have a great pregnancy and improve outcomes for you and your baby. I'm so excited for you to hear all this information. So without further ado, Lily, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for being here. I'm super stoked for this conversation. And, gestational diabetes is not a topic that we are unfamiliar with. It's something that we all kind of think about when we get pregnant. It's something that is a topic of conversation with our providers. And I think actually one of the stickiest parts of this conversation is, if we get diagnosed with GD, how do we properly support and nourish our body throughout that journey? And so I'm really excited to dive into all of that with you today. And I think I'd like to start out probably setting the stage with, what does traditional nutrition advice for someone with gestational diabetes look like compared to the food approach that you recommend in your books, which I love so much?
Well, there are some distinct differences there. From the conventional standpoint, they really teach from the perspective of keeping carbohydrate intake consistent in terms of the quantity of carbohydrates, meal to meal and snack to snack, so you're not getting all of your carbs at one time of the day. And that I generally agree with. However, the recommended minimum level of carbs they recommend, I think, is set too high. So it's set at 175 grams per day. And if you think about, macronutrients have different effects on our blood sugar, and carbohydrates are the ones that affect our blood sugar the most, whereas fat and protein tend to just stabilize our blood sugar levels. And it's a little, you know, interesting when you start thinking about, okay, like how do we diagnose gestational diabetes? Usually it's with a glucose tolerance test. How does your body tolerate this certain amount of glucose? In other words, carbohydrates. And if you get a number that's higher than whatever the set threshold is, then you're considered a positive diagnosis for gestational diabetes. Now, if you look at the amount of carbs, the amount of glucose at those oral glucose tolerance tests, you're looking at like 50 to 75 to 100 grams, depending on which test you've taken. And so when we look at a meal plan that splits 175 grams of carbs across the day, and that's the minimum, right? You have a lot of meal plans that have like 200, 230 grams of carbs. Sometimes you're looking at 50 grams or 75 grams of carbs or more per meal. And it's like, why would we expect you to have a blood sugar number within range when you literally failed a test with a glucose challenge with that amount of carbohydrates, right? So, like, it doesn't match the diagnosis. The diagnosis is carbohydrate intolerance of pregnancy or insulin resistance of pregnancy or high blood sugar in pregnancy. All of that requires that we put some attention to the quantity and quality of carbohydrates we're consuming. So if we're giving people a diet that's too high in carbohydrates, you're simply going to have high blood sugar after meals, and then that gets you on the intervention train of medication and insulin, which again isn't always necessary. We can really keep you properly nourished, get baby all the nutrition they need, get you all the vitamins and minerals you need on a diet that simply is slightly lower in carbohydrates. And it's not necessarily that I put people on a ketogenic diet or a super restrictive diet by any means. This is a calorie sufficient, nutrient sufficient diet with enough protein. We're simply titrating the carbohydrates to a level that the person with gestational diabetes can maintain normal blood sugar levels after meals. Now, remember, all of our like conventional nutrition guidelines they're a reflection of the general like population-wide dietary guidelines. So all of the concerns about saturated fat and meat consumption, full fat dairy and egg yolks and stuff, that tends to all carry over into the pregnancy sphere as well, which is not necessarily evidence-based. So from my perspective, I try to educate people on the foods that raise your blood sugar, the foods that don't raise your blood sugar. We do work on macronutrient balance and spreading carbohydrates throughout meals and snacks, yes. But I allow wiggle room for people to adjust their carb amount and carb types to what they're seeing in their blood sugar readings after a meal. So your conventional meal plan may have said egg whites, oatmeal, skim milk, and a half a banana for breakfast or something. And that might not work great for your blood sugar. And it's also not going to be very nutritionally complete when you're taking the yolk out of the egg. I might instead have you do like a couple of eggs at your breakfast, maybe some sauteed vegetables on the side. And yeah, there may be some carbs there too. There may be some fruit. There may be like a piece of whole grain sourdough bread with butter on it, but it'll be a slightly more, in my opinion, a more balanced meal. It won't be as high in carbohydrates. It'll be higher in protein. It'll be higher in fat, so it keeps you satiated for longer. And it's also a lot higher in vitamins and minerals.
So at the time of this recording, I don't have gestational diabetes, and I'm just about to enter my third trimester. And I have still been following some of your food plans in your book, not because I have gestational diabetes, but because they are well balanced meals. Now, I'll tailor them because I obviously don't have GD right now. So I don't need necessarily that. I don't need like a meal plan. I guess I'm not following a meal plan, but what I have found so helpful as someone who is pregnant and has never focused so much on nutrition, I've always just kind of eaten what I wanted to eat. I was always kind of healthy, and I never really knew very much about blood sugar. I've talked about this in many episodes. I've talked about it my whole pregnancy. Is I've never paid attention to this kind of stuff. I definitely never like checked my blood sugar. I just like, if I felt good, I wanted to eat it, I would eat it. And I ate clean and relatively healthy, but if I wanted dessert, I would have dessert. I have found your book so helpful as far as giving ideas of what can I pair together and how should I start my morning off because, and I've told this, so listeners, forgive me if you're like, okay, HeHe, I'm so tired of hearing this story, but when I was in the first trimester, I decided to wear a CGM. And I did this very intentionally. I just wanted to see what my blood sugar was doing. I wanted to know that if there was any changes or tweaks to my lifestyle or my movement routine or my dietary routine, and I smile because that was the biggest thing. Is I was waking up and I thought I am doing so good. I am eating, I'm having coffee and I'm drinking water and I'm having a biscuit with butter and jelly and then I'm having yogurt and fruit on top and honey, and I just must be killing it. And I was killing my blood sugar. It was skyrocketing, and I did not
Oh.
even, I mean, I didn't know. I had no idea. I just thought, wow, this is a really good, solid breakfast. And so it was very insightful. And so it was actually that reminded me, like, oh, I should get Lily Nichols' book and just use it as kind of a guide of what do well balanced meals look like. So I guess everything that you've shared, plus now sharing my little anecdotal story of how probably a lot of people feel they don't just pay attention to their blood sugar without a cause or without a reason. Why is there so much debate and almost misinformation slash outdated information when it comes to consuming carbs when you have gestational diabetes? Like, why would the mainstream organizations be recommending that almost carb heavy diet when we know that it's not that great for our blood sugar? What's that about?
Oh gosh, I could give like a 90-minute lecture just on this question alone, and I have before, so I'll try to keep it brief. So, I wouldn't have written a book on gestational diabetes if I felt that the guidelines were working well. So, like, I'll have to tell a little story about when I was kind of early on in clinical practice and was actually following the guidelines and recommending that for the clients I was seeing, and I was seeing their blood sugar not respond favorably. Not super surprising because at the time I didn't have blood sugar issues myself and I ate less carbs than the meal plans I was giving them when they have like a diagnosable issue with their blood sugar and ability to tolerate carbohydrates. So it was like, something's a little off here, but I didn't want to recommend anything that could be harmful. This is, by the way, why so few people, like until I had come out with my book, so few people wanted to ever touch or question the pregnancy guidelines because you assume there's really strong evidence behind why they're there. And like me, nobody wants to do anything that could harm a mom or baby. So I had assumed like the carb recommendations must have like really strong evidence behind them. Now, it was really hard to find where the recommendations came from. Why is it 175 grams? And there's a whole chapter in Real Food for Gestational Diabetes answering this question, by the way. But ultimately, it came down to some assumptions. These are written about in the Institute of Medicine. They have a like 1,300-page document on like macronutrient and nutrient requirements, and it includes a section on pregnancy where they go into this. So they set like a sort of minimum, bare minimum level of carbs of about 130 grams per day. This is just for a general adult. Whether that's actually evidence-based is highly questionable, and I'll spare you the details, but they assume 130 grams per day for an adult. And then, since we know that the baby requires some glucose for growth, they added on the additional amount of glucose that's consumed to fuel the fetal brain development, which was added about 35 grams, which takes you to 165. And I think they just rounded up to 175 to make it a nice round number. But that's where the number comes from. Now, the question as to like whether you can go lower in carbs, there's all sorts of arguments about if you don't give a certain amount of carbs, then it's going to harm baby's brain development, or the woman might go into ketosis, and that could be harmful to the baby's brain. And ultimately, that has actually not panned out to be true per the research. Again, there's a whole chapter going through the intricacies of like different types of ketosis and what the studies originally were looking at versus what we know now. Even since that book has been published, we have a whole bunch of extra research, very interesting, where we're looking at like maternal ketone levels relative to carbohydrate intake. And there's actually no correlation between maternal blood ketone levels and carb intake even among women eating very low carb, like lower carb than where my recommendations fall. So, and now we have data on the fetal brain actually requiring ketones to fuel brain growth. Like the brain is actually very effective at using ketones for energy. So this whole idea that, oh, the ketones would be overtly harmful, whether or not those are present or whether or not those are related to carbohydrate intake, it's a bunk argument because babies are literally born in ketosis and remain in ketosis for quite a long period of time after birth. It's just part of the physiological design that we can run off of different fuels. Glucose is one of those fuels. Our bodies can make glucose from other fuels if necessary, but we can also use fuels like lactate and ketones. And that's a normal part of human physiology, and it's a normal part of pregnancy physiology as well, to more readily go into ketosis in late pregnancy compared to somebody who's not pregnant at all. So ultimately, that's kind of like why they are what they are, but also why the recommendations, the concerns over differing recommendations like mine, which may be lower in carbs, concerns over that are really not founded. In fact, when you start to do nutrient analyses on meal plans that are whole food but lower carb and sufficient calories, you actually often see higher micronutrient levels, like higher vitamin and mineral levels in the lower carb than the higher carb versions. Because think about it, like our dietary guidelines, they recommend a pretty high amount of carbs, 45 to 65% of calories from carbs. Half of those, half of the grain carbs, are allowed to be refined grains, which are devoid of a lot of nutrients, minus what they fortified into them. And you often have carbohydrates displacing other more nutrient-dense foods, like your vegetables, non-starchy vegetables, and nuts and seeds, and meat and fish, and eggs and dairy. And so you actually see a better micronutrient intake when women eat fewer carbs, and of the carbs, they're eating better quality carbs, not just all these refined grains.
Okay, so the amount of carbs that we consume every day, is it tailored on our individual body, like to what our weight is? Is it weight based? So, for example, I got pregnant at 98 pounds. I have gained 25 pounds in pregnancy so far. Should I be tailoring my carb intake to my weight versus someone who maybe started pregnancy at 200 pounds and has gained 30 or 40 pounds so far? Or maybe they've gained the same 25 pounds that I have. It makes sense to me, non-nutritionist, right? Someone who's never paid attention to blood sugar before, that we would be tailoring our carb intake based on what our bodies, where we started in pregnancy and how our pregnancies are going. Is that true, or is there a better approach?
So clinically, that's how I would approach it. From like a guidelines perspective, our carbohydrate guidelines are not based on a body weight calculation. Unlike protein, one way to calculate protein requirements and really like zero in on a more exact number is with a body weight calculation. There isn't one for pregnancy necessarily. There's some for like elite athletes and stuff, but that's like a separate conversation. So really like the carb ranges, they can give you either like a percent of calories range, or speaking from the guidelines, or they can give you like a gram minimum range, and then you may adjust that up or down based on your caloric requirements. So somebody who's smaller generally needs fewer calories than somebody who's larger. However, if somebody is larger to the point that their maybe weight is causing some health issues or is related to some health issues, you might titrate down their calories a little bit, and that may like kind of titrate down their carbs as well. From my perspective though, to speak more broadly, like clinically with what I would do, somebody who is pretty healthy, gaining weight at an expected range, started their pregnancy at a healthy body weight, no signs of blood sugar issues such as yourself, I don't see a need necessarily to implement like a low carb diet. Like moderately low carb, again, my opinion is the guidelines are set too high. So moderately low carb from that perspective, but really no need to be like counting anything. More like how you're approaching it, macro balancing your meals, making sure you're pairing proteins and fats with your carbohydrates, choosing better quality carbohydrates. So more fruits and vegetables and whole grains and legumes versus white bread and processed cereals and sugar, right? Like that is probably like enough. And then somebody who maybe is starting their pregnancy at a heavier weight or is gaining a lot more quickly than we'd expect. Maybe there's some signs of some blood sugar issues. Maybe there's a history of some insulin resistance, like a lot of polycystic ovarian syndrome. Women will have blood sugar issues like pre-existing coming into pregnancy. They might be better off with a slightly lower carb intake and also like just proactively checking their blood sugar to see where they're at, even before or even after doing like their gestational diabetes screening, because sometimes it's a condition that can develop at different stages in pregnancy or get caught in different ways. So you have false positives and false negatives on any particular test, but absolutely somebody who's maybe gaining a little quicker, they would likely benefit from decreasing their carbs. And oftentimes, if they do check their glucose levels, they'll see, like you saw with your breakfast, like, oh wow, my blood sugar is spiking a lot more than I thought. And it doesn't have to be this dramatic dietary overhaul. It might simply be, I'm going to have an open faced sandwich at lunch instead of that second piece of bread, or I'm going to skip the side of a bag of chips at this meal, and that like removes one additional source of carbs from the meal, and add more vegetables, add more protein to that meal so you're getting enough calories and like you're set, right? Doesn't always have to be like a major thing that you have to calculate or a major dietary overhaul.
Yeah, that was the fix for me. So the fix for me was to add protein to my breakfast. And then I stopped drinking my coffee first, which is admittedly, listeners, I know that this, something I was working on pre-pregnancy. I was trying to get water in and then food and then coffee. But as a ritualistic woman, I just
Yeah.
love to wake up and have my coffee. But I did. I started to eat before I had my coffee, especially in pregnancy, and it was just something that I was not flexible with. Whereas pre-pregnancy, it was just myself that I was harming. So I was like, it's okay today. Whereas now in
Right.
pregnancy, I'm like, okay, I really should eat something. And then I started to add eggs and some sort of meat protein in my breakfast every morning, and that has been super helpful. And now my blood sugar is totally fine. I don't see that spike. And so it's been
Yeah.
much more stable. Okay, so I guess my next question is for women who are going into their providers and their providers are pushing some sort of, let's call it restrictive on either side of the spectrum. They're either pushing this like really high carb meal plan, or they're pushing no carbs, stay away from carbs, don't have any carbs. How do we navigate this conversation with our provider, especially if we can either feel in our body that it's not good for us? Maybe we're wearing a CGM, maybe we're checking our blood sugars, but we know it's not good for us. How do you recommend people approach this conversation with their provider to have that collaborative approach, but also set boundaries of this is not working for my body?
Yeah, it's always a tricky conversation. So there's a couple different ways that you could approach it. I mean, you can approach it from the angle of you want to offer some feedback and some education about, I actually read da 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 da, and I'm going to do da 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 da. Or you can take it from the perspective of, I mean, at the end of the day, most OB providers don't have specific nutrition training, and particularly not specific nutrition training in pregnancy. I know this is shocking. I actually have a research brief on my Instagram. I think I also wrote about this on my blog, going into where there are deficits in nutrition education among providers, particularly prenatal nutrition. So they actually did a survey and an official survey, and like they published a research paper on the results asking OBGYN residents. So these are MDs now. They've finished medical school. They're in their residency and specializing in OBGYN. And the majority of them, I think it was something like 92%, don't quote me on that, did not have substantial education in prenatal nutrition. And even dietitians, I don't want to hate on dietitians, I am one, but we don't get a lot of training in prenatal nutrition specifically in school. I had one class in my undergrad called Life Cycle Nutrition that talked about all the different life cycles, like how nutrition changes through like infant feeding, toddlerhood, all the way across. Pregnancy was maybe one, maybe two lectures. It's been a long time, but it wasn't a heavy focus. So Sometimes we're expecting our providers to know a lot more things than they were trained in, and that maybe is an unreasonable and unfair expectation. I would hope RDs would seek out the extra education, but for OBGYNs, they have so many things on their mind. I mean, they are thinking about the possible UTI and interpreting these lab results, and is it iron deficiency anemia or is it something else? And oh, that uterine artery Doppler reading looked a little weird in this ultrasound. Oh, we need to check that. Like, they have so many things on their mind. I understand that's not in necessarily in their scope unless that's extra training they sought out on their own. So it may be something that you simply, as a patient, smile and nod and then do your own thing. Because if you are listening to your body and what you're doing is feeling good and you're getting your information from a source that is reliable. I mean, be careful with social media or what ChatGPT is telling you. Like, it's not always true. But if you're getting it from a reliable source, somebody who's specialized in prenatal nutrition, like maybe you're reading Real Food for Pregnancy or Real Food for Gestational Diabetes, nothing in there is going to be totally outlandishly crazy. It's not overly restrictive. And you certainly know that it's evidence-based. And if you're feeling good, great. And if you're not feeling good, that is a time where I would definitely be opening up conversation with your provider, possibly even asking for a referral to a dietitian or a nutritionist who specializes in prenatal nutrition, and like getting to the bottom of why what you're doing isn't working. But yeah, big red flags on overly restrictive diets or like advice that's coming from a fear-based place, like don't eat that, that's going to kill your baby, or you have to eat this amount of whatever, otherwise XYZ negative thing is going to happen. That kind of advice tends to not really sit well. It doesn't feel good on the receiving end, and sometimes those recommendations oftentimes don't really have any like evidence backing to them. So just be a careful consumer of whatever information you're taking in.
Yeah, I think that's a lot of people's experience, right? Is they get diagnosed with GD and then they feel very restricted in what they can or can't eat, or they feel as if they've been put on this really restrictive eating plan, diet plan, meal plan. And then you are filled with this fear of like, well, I don't know if I'm allowed to kind of veer from this meal plan. I don't know if I'm allowed to make changes, even if I know what I'm doing and what I've been told isn't working for my body. And I will say, if you are with a progressive provider who seems very receptive, you guys, this would be a really great opportunity for you to bring Lily's book into the office with you and say, I've been reading this book. It has made me feel educated. It has made me feel informed. I feel empowered to make decisions. I wanted to share it with you, not only so you knew where I was getting my information, but also I thought it might be of interest to you. And you don't have to point out, like, I know you don't have nutrition information or
Right.
education, right? Like, you don't have to rub it in their face, but you could just like lay the seed, just put it in their little brain and give them this little seed of like, oh, there is information out there that I can look into to better support my clients with all their free time that they have to read books on the side. But if you do have a provider that's receptive, please don't be afraid to bring in a book and say, I've been loving this book. I thought I would share it with you because I think that you might love it too. I think that's a really great touch point between you and your provider to make a cool, like, just human connection. If you're in the thick of postpartum right now, or like me, headed there real soon, like real soon, like in the next few days, maybe weeks, I want you to listen closely. There is one thing that has helped me feel like me again in pregnancy and is a must have in postpartum, and that's Cozy Earth. When your body is healing, your hormones are doing acrobatics, and you're covered in spit up and milk by 10 a.m., slipping into luxurious bamboo pajamas that feel like a hug from heaven, total game changer. These PJs are soft, like cancel all your plans and never take them off soft. And they keep you cool through the night sweats, warm through the chills, and comfortable when nothing else fits quite right. Plus, they feel like a hug, but a hug in all the right places and loose in all the places that you don't want to be compressed. And if you're spending more time than ever in bed, feeding, bonding, crying, hey, no judgment, then your sheets better be working as hard as you are. Cozy Earth's bamboo sheets are exactly what I imagine a cloud would feel like if I could nap on a cloud. No overheating, no scratchy fabric, just pure breathable softness that actually helps you sleep deeper, whenever you can catch those rare moments of sleep. This isn't just bedding, it's postpartum self-preservation. And don't forget to grab your Cozy Earth jogger set for running errands or those mini appointments that come your way in the first few weeks postpartum. You will feel put together while also feeling relaxed and without the pressure of finding an outfit that fits your newly postpartum body. And right now, you can stack my code HeHe, H-E-H-E, on top of their site-wide sale, giving you up to 40% off in savings. That's nearly half off the comfort that your body and soul are craving right now. Because you're not just a new mom. You're a queen in recovery, baby, and Cozy Earth gets that. These deals won't last long, so start your holiday shopping right now. Visit CozyEarth.com and save up to 40% off using the code HeHe. That's H-E-H-E. Okay, in terms of the restrictive diet thing, I think a lot of us do feel like, oh my God, now I have these things I can and can't eat, or I have to eat, or I absolutely cannot eat. When we talk about pairing foods, can you dive a little bit more into good pairings that we know are good for our blood sugar? And in this, if you could share maybe some healthy carbs that aren't necessarily those nutritionally void, fortified carb, sources.
Yeah, great question. And by the way, thanks for the tip to bring the book into your
Yeah.
provider, because that's actually the number one way that providers learn about my books. It's not like they can sit around like reading general books all the time. Like it really helps to have patients recommend it. So from the perspective of blood sugar balance, and honestly, just like feeling good and having good energy, this applies to anybody pregnant or not, even your young toddlers and kids. Trying to make sure you pair your carbohydrates with something else that is not a blood sugar raising food is really helpful. So I call it no naked carbs. You don't want to have the carbs by themselves. You want to have them paired with something else. So the something else that generally helps, first and foremost, better quality carbohydrates that haven't been processed to remove their fiber helps to improve your blood sugar balance because the fiber slows down how quickly those carbohydrates are broken down and absorbed. So a whole grain over a white flour based product is always a level up. A piece of whole fruit versus fruit juice where the fiber has all been extracted and removed is a level up, right? So like better quality carbs is a good idea, but also pairing them with something that has some protein or fat, ideally both, and especially the protein component, I would say, really helps to dampen the blood sugar spike. So if you have just like a piece of fruit on its own, even though it's a whole piece of fruit with its fiber intact, there's no protein, there's no fat in there to slow down the blood sugar rise. So, a whole apple won't spike your blood sugar as much as apple juice, but it's still going to cause a spike and then a crash. Whereas if you paired that apple with maybe some peanut butter or almond butter, or Greek yogurt or cottage cheese, something that has a good amount of protein, your blood sugar isn't going to spike as high. It's also not going to bottom out and crash as quickly because the protein and fat help to kind of stabilize your blood sugar levels. So fruit and nut butter or fruit and cheese, fruit and Greek yogurt, fruit and cottage cheese are a good pairing. If you're having grains like maybe bread, maybe you have it with some eggs or some cheese or some meat or some fish. Some people do cottage cheese on toast. I don't know. Even a piece of toast with avocado is great. I'd love to see it with a little protein as well, but avocado has fat And interestingly, avocados also have a lot of fiber, so that's still a level up compared to a piece of bread on its own. If you're having pasta, maybe you have not just pasta with red sauce, but you have pasta with red sauce that has meatballs in it, or like a bolognese sauce with ground meat in it, and you add some cheese on it, right? Then you're getting extra protein. Maybe you have like a slightly smaller portion of pasta and put a really big side of vegetables, maybe some broccoli. You put the sauce all over all of that. There, you're like slightly decreasing the carbs, you're amping up the protein. Somebody who's really carb sensitive might do well with a meal that's has a lot more veggies in there, that's displacing some of the carbs on the plate. Or a big side salad could be an option for that meal. So just trying to pair it. And I think the biggest challenge is often for people breakfast, because so many of our breakfast foods are very carb heavy. We got the pancakes and the waffles and the toast and the oatmeal and the cereal and the bagels or the fruit or the smoothie. How can you get some extra protein in there? It doesn't mean taking out the carbs. Notice I'm giving you a carb option and just having you add something to it. Unless you have to for blood sugar reasons, like you still have the carb, you're just adding something to it. So if you're making a smoothie, instead of doing a smoothie that is mostly fruit and then you're adding like juice to it or something where it's just fruit on fruit, like all sugar. Maybe you have a little fruit, maybe it's a lower sugar fruit, like frozen berries or something. And then you add in some Greek yogurt or cottage cheese or protein powder or some nut butter to give you a little extra protein. And maybe choose a liquid for it that's not going to add a ton of extra sugar. So maybe leave out the juice for the smoothie. You could certainly just do water, or you could do milk or a nut milk, a coconut milk or something that would like generally bring the carb level down quite a bit and like amp up the protein and fat with one of those combinations. If you're doing really like having toast with jam at breakfast, maybe you could still have that, but have that as a side to your eggs and then you're good to go. Or at the very least, even though it's not ridiculously high protein, but like an open faced peanut butter and jelly, like put peanut butter on that toast and then some jelly. Like it's not a super high protein breakfast, but at least you're getting some. And you'll notice that it gives you more satiety, like it has more staying power than just starting the morning with toast and jam. So any little place that you can bring in a little extra protein is a good idea.
Would you say that if someone is eating and they are hungry within 90 minutes to 2 hours after eating, that they're not getting enough protein?
Likely they're not getting enough protein. It can also be possible that you can eat a well-balanced snack or meal and your portion sizes are just too small. So like if somebody's just under eating as a whole, you're gonna be hungry within an hour or two. Protein is probably one of the bigger components, but I will add a caveat that if you're adding only super lean, non-fat protein sources and you don't have any fat coming in with that meal, that's also going to be a challenge for your satiety. Like fat is very helpful at stabilizing our blood sugar levels, and of course it's adding calories too. So if you are having like, say at lunch, your protein source is boneless, skinless chicken breast, or maybe you made a smoothie and you added like a protein powder to it, but there was no fat source in the smoothie. So you did the berries, you did the protein powder, you added water. It may have just been like too low calorie and too low in fat. It won't give you that same like staying power as a whole food source, which is why I like whole foods where they haven't taken the fat out of everything because it's naturally giving you that good balance of protein and fat, which is like the ultimate combination for satiety. So if like boneless, skinless chicken breast isn't giving you that satiety, do skin on chicken breast or do chicken thigh that has more fat or do roast a whole chicken and have like the drumstick and have part of the breast and also consume the yummy crispy skin that's on it. That's going to give you that staying power that'll keep you full for longer. So two things, like make sure you're getting enough protein, but also think about like, are you getting enough food as a whole or are you under eating potentially?
Yeah, I think we've been conditioned as Americans, but particularly women, that fat is bad, right? We don't want to be fat and we don't want to eat a lot of fat and we want low fat this and low fat that and everything is watch the fat. And just from my child development background, you guys, your baby's brain needs fat. They need it now while you're pregnant. You need it while you're trying to conceive, and then they're going to need it for the first few years of their life. And in those first 3 years of their life, their brain expands so much. I mean, exponentially. And a lot of that is driven by fat. So please don't be afraid of fat. It's about getting in healthy fats and the right amount of fat. Okay, Lily, I have this section that I'm calling like, what does Lily think? So I'd love to get your opinion on a couple of things. Walking after meals to stabilize your blood sugar, good or bad?
Great. Yeah, a short walk can definitely bring your blood sugar down. So that's a great time to do it.
Okay, and do you think that we should be doing it after all three meals, or do you think after just our heaviest meal, or kind of whenever it fits into our lifestyle is good enough?
Honestly, whenever it fits into your lifestyle is my opinion. However, we can use exercise prescriptively if you have somebody who's really very carbohydrate sensitive, like their tolerance level for carbs is so low that they're skirting on like a really low intake across the day and they feel better getting a little more carbs, but it's pushing their blood sugar higher than we'd like. We might prescriptively be like, okay, we'll have those extra carbs, but also go on this 10-minute walk after each meal. Like sometimes you need to take it to that level, but generally speaking, exercise done at any point in the day is going to be beneficial. The sort of mild aerobic exercise tends to be really helpful for bringing like that immediate glucose down a little bit because your muscles are taking up that glucose, but you still tend to see carryover effects day after day in somebody who's active. And especially if you do some activity that's building strength, like some weightlifting, resistance exercises, as you build more muscle mass, you have more metabolically active, lean body mass. And that, like over time, is bringing your glucose levels down. So we ideally like to see a little bit of both. But honestly, for many individuals who are entirely sedentary, even adding in a 10-minute walk after any of their meals is going to be a level up. So, like, start at a place that feels doable, and it's about making it a consistent habit.
That's nice to know that it can just be 10 minutes or so and that you don't have to really commit to like a mile after eating
Oh, yeah.
your
Yeah.
lunch or take 30 minutes off of work to go for a mile walk. So that's super comforting. What would cause someone to be that sensitive to carbs that they are eating such low levels, but still having it's kind of raising their blood sugar, even though they're not really eating that much carbs, that many carbs?
Yeah, it's there can be a couple of things going on. There's even some different like subtypes of gestational diabetes that they've defined in the literature. So you have some individuals who they're simply insulin resistant. Their insulin levels are high, but their body's not very responsive to it. And then you have some individuals who have low insulin output. So like over the course of pregnancy, we're going to need to secrete more insulin to cover the physiologic changes that are happening in the body, which if you're not producing more insulin as pregnancy progresses, you're going to have blood sugar issues. So like that can be the issue as well. That's a lot more rare than the insulin resistance category. And then sometimes you have both of those issues combined. They're both insulin resistant and they're kind of having trouble producing enough insulin as well to cover the changes happening in later pregnancy. So, usually in a scenario like this where somebody's very carb sensitive, like they can't tolerate more than like 10 grams of carbs at a meal or something, where most individuals they're going to be able to handle more than that, maybe 15, 20, 30, sometimes even 45 or beyond for a very active person with no blood sugar issues whatsoever. This is often in somebody who had a pre-existing blood sugar issue before pregnancy. We're just catching it in pregnancy, but they probably had some blood sugar challenges ahead of time. So that can be a number of things. Sometimes it's even inherited from our family. There's a propensity towards prediabetes or type 2 diabetes. There could be excessive caloric intake over time can drive this issue. Lack of certain micronutrients can sabotage our metabolism, especially many minerals, but also certain B vitamins. Being inactive, especially for long periods of time. Body composition, that's like very low lean body mass, but a really high body fat percentage can predispose to that. There's a number of things that could be going on. And the challenge in pregnancy is like you don't really have the luxury of time for like a full on lifestyle overhaul where we like fix all the underlying metabolic issues within this like finite period of time. We can work on them, certainly. And a lot of people applying the information from my book are doing exactly that. But we also need to be responsive to the situation at hand. So if it gets to the point where a person really is like, their diet is so restrictive that like we're risking nutrient deficiencies or it's causing them too much stress. Maybe the diet is giving them enough essential nutrients, but it's too challenging and stressful to follow. Sometimes they're a good candidate for adding in medication or insulin as a tool. Like we have these things as tools to help. They're not good or bad. They are simply tools. I like to give people all the resources to like maximize all your dietary and lifestyle interventions to get your blood sugar into a good place. And yet still, we sometimes also need to add on those tools. So in some of those scenarios, that's what we need to do. And it's usually finite for just the period of time in pregnancy when we have that sort of built-in pregnancy-induced insulin resistance to add on top of whatever else is going on. And usually those medications don't need to be continued postpartum. In rare instances, they may, but usually they're discontinued after pregnancy.
I love how the thread of individualized care comes up in almost every single episode. It's like, look at your body, let's see what you need as an individual, and then let's tailor that based on the tools that we have in our toolbox. Okay, next up is how do you feel about the veggies first approach, which I know has been, it's gotten a lot of light because of the glucose goddess. I don't know that she necessarily invented this or if this is her idea. Maybe it is. I don't follow her super closely. But is the idea of eat your veggies first good, bad, neutral?
Yeah, well, I think Jesse's stuff is great. Years ago, we did like an Instagram live on gestational diabetes before her books and before she blew up.
Awesome.
And her accounts are huge now. It's great watching her. There is indeed research on this, yes, that the order in which you consume foods can influence your blood sugar response. So, speaking to that person who maybe has like really low threshold for carbohydrate tolerance, one of the things we might do is switch around the order in which they're consuming their macronutrients at their meal or food groups. So if we start with either vegetables, a low starch vegetable like broccoli or something, we're not talking like potatoes or sweet potatoes, which are highly starchy. They kind of count more as a carb, even though they're also a vegetable. If we start with something like broccoli, or if we start with a protein source at the meal, say the meat or fish or egg, and then the carbohydrate is saved for a later part in the meal. So maybe you save that side of sweet potato or white potato for the end of the meal. We can see a decrease in the blood sugar response upwards, depends on the research study you're looking at, but upwards of maybe 30 to 40%, it can lower that spike. So it does definitely reduce the spike. It doesn't eliminate the impact that carbohydrates have on your blood sugar. I think that's an important caveat because some people think, oh, well, if I follow your advice of no naked carbs, then everything's fine. Or if I follow the food order thing, then I can eat all the carbs I want, or they won't affect my blood sugar at all. They still are going to have an effect. It is simply like biology that carbohydrates break down into glucose and raise your blood sugar levels, but you're slowing down the process of digesting and breaking down and absorbing that glucose. Hence, it doesn't spike quite as high. So yeah, that's a great option to build in. So you can start with the vegetable portion at your meal or add like a side salad before you eat or snack on some crudité, like have some celery while you're cooking your dinner and have that first before you dive into the meal. Great idea. Or if you're having a snack, say you're having like, I don't know, a meat stick and an apple or something, have your meat stick first, have the apple second.
Wow, okay. Love that. All right, how do you feel about wearing a continuous glucose monitoring instead of doing the traditional challenge, whether that be something organic like the fresh test or the traditional glucola drink?
This is kind of a new arena in the gestational diabetes space. Even CGMs in pregnancy. I just want to not to say how old I am, but like when I first started out, CGMs, like sometimes we had type 1 diabetics who didn't even have a CGM in pregnancy. There's a lot of controversy about CGM in pregnancy. Is it going to be accurate? All this stuff. And you still have some providers saying that it's not accurate in pregnancy, even though that's not necessarily the case per the research we have now. The challenge with, so first and foremost, I am a proponent of giving options in lieu of a glucose tolerance test because it's not always the right choice for somebody for a number of reasons. And I personally used a CGM in my second pregnancy. I wore one each trimester to check in on my glucose levels. And I did that, you're wearing it, yeah. I did that in lieu of doing a glucose tolerance test, knowing that I'm a person who's pretty metabolically healthy. I'm not going to carb load prior to a glucose tolerance test, so my risk of a false positive is higher, nor do I just don't want to do it. So I was very proactive about testing my glucose. I also tested with a glucometer, so I was one of those people who was like on top of it. And for those individuals, I think it can be a good option. Now, the challenge is that there aren't like established thresholds or like number of reading or time within range or any of that stuff. There's no governing body that is given this established, okay, when you have a client wearing a CGM during this week of pregnancy or this range, say 24 to 28 weeks, and they have this percentage of readings out of range, then it's gestational diabetes, or then it's not. Like that clear cut, this is a diagnosable issue and this is not a diagnosable issue, doesn't exist. And so it comes up to your provider's like experience and clinical knowledge for trying to make that delineation. And this is why there's been delays in this being a more common option. And so that's the challenge. There's also, CGMs are not always perfectly accurate. There's no 100% perfectly accurate way to assess glucose. Let me say that. So there are going to be problems with glucose tolerance tests, particularly in individuals who eat low carb prior to the test. You're going to have issues with finger stick glucometers. Some of them are more accurate than others. The test strips can be expired. They could have been left in a hot car. Your sticky finger toddler could have opened them up and left all the test strips on the floor and got them with their sticky fingers back in the container before you noticed, and that throws off your results. Your soap can have glucose ingredients in it that can throw off your reading. There's like a million things that can go wrong. And with a CGM, sometimes you get false lows with certain brands more than others, especially overnight. Some of the brands can be calibrated, some of them can't. Sometimes the factory calibration is bunk and you get a bad sensor. That's happened to me before. So there's challenges with any of the options, first and foremost. I think CGM, what I like about it is you get a very useful, like immediate feedback on what your blood sugar response is to any given food or stressor or interrupted sleep or dehydration or any other things, exercise, certain types of exercise. Like you can see in real time what's happening. And that is amazing because if you're just doing a finger stick, checking fasting and after each meal, you're getting a single time point. So like I've written about CGM experiments on my blog several times, and I also have a blog post on date consumption in pregnancy, like the dried fruit dates that people use to supposedly help with labor and how that affected blood sugar. And you can have something like, for me, I'm a highly insulin sensitive person, and so I can have something that's like pure carbs and I'll get a big spike, maybe not super big, but I'll get a noticeable spike and then a super crash. And that'll happen before 1 hour. So if I was testing my blood sugar only at an hour after a meal or 2 hours after a meal, I wouldn't catch the issue that's happening. Like the issue already was resolved. My body's come back to homeostasis. I might feel like crap and it may not be good for me or my baby, but I've come back to homeostasis by the time that I check. And with a CGM, you can see the spike no matter when it's happening. You're not guessing when to test to catch the spike. I love that. I do think, though, that sometimes a CGM, it can make people overly restrictive because you start to get concerned when you see any variation in your glucose levels, and variation in your glucose levels are entirely normal and expected. And a single food that makes it spike and then go back down does not mean you can never have that food. Like some people get so obsessive about it when they see like a 10 or 20 or 30 point change in their glucose that they start like getting super restrictive on their dietary intake. Because guess what flatlines your blood sugar? Not eating, right? So you can get people who just undereat or get overly restrictive with carbohydrates because they're seeing normal variation in glucose patterns. And that's where it gets like a little tricky, that I just want to give a little caution for somebody who's kind of like going out on their own to do it, which you now can do because you can get them over the counter. It can be really helpful to get some like feedback from a healthcare practitioner to interpret like what you're actually seeing in your readings and when would it be cause for concern, and maybe do some like side testing on the side to see if, your readings are actually accurate. Check with a normal glucometer, get your first trimester A1C tested to see like, is your blood sugar generally in a good place or at a concerning place? Like that might give you some information on whether you want to do a CGM, whether it's like indicated or not. But I just want to give that caution because it has kind of raised some concern, especially in like individuals who kind of err on the side of disordered eating patterns, that it can cause some over restriction, and that's not necessary.
Yeah, I hear that as well. Okay, you talking about there not being really kind of like a standard reminds me of how different hospitals have different cutoffs for
Yes.
gestational diabetes testing. Tell us about that and what we need to know as consumers.
So you're asking me all these questions that are like, it's not easy to give a short answer. I'm trying.
Sure. No,
So
you're doing a great job. We're nerds around here. We love the more information.
yeah, so it depends on like which type of a glucose tolerance test that your provider has given and which cutoffs you're using. So there's there's different standards. There's a two-step glucose tolerance test, and then there's a one-step test. And the two-step test gives you a 50-gram glucose challenge. And then if you don't pass that test, they bring you back for the 3-hour 100-gram glucose challenge. Now, there's like 3 different levels that a clinician can choose for their cutoff for the 50-gram challenge, which is annoying. And then with the 3-hour 100-gram test, there's 2 different main criteria that they can choose from that each have slightly different values for the cutoffs. Then you have the one single step test. That's a 75-gram 2-hour glucose tolerance test performed fasting. That is the one that most countries in the world follow. That's the one that the California Diabetes and Pregnancy Program follows, which I used to work for their organization. They have stricter cutoff criteria, but there's only one defined cutoff criteria. If you have a single reading that's out of range, that's considered a positive diagnosis. Whereas sometimes on that 3-hour test, you have to have 2 or more. It depends on which criteria the provider is following. So it's amazing to me, having been in this field as long as I have, there's still not a single accepted consensus on which one to do. I even heard Australia recently walked back their stricter diagnostic criteria to more lenient criteria. The whole reason that there was all this uproar over making the criteria more strict in the first place was because we had really extensive, like, global data from over 23,000 women, 11 different countries, looking at maternal blood sugar levels and outcomes for her and baby, showing that it's a rather linear relationship. Like as blood sugar goes up, even mildly, you see increased risks, adverse outcomes for both mom and baby. And so that's what like had people walking the criteria down to these more stricter criteria. But then there's concern that we're catching more mild gestational diabetes and maybe we're treating unnecessarily, causing more stress, costing the healthcare system a lot of money. And ultimately, for me, having been in this field for so long and also just being a person who I err on the side of like less medicalized pregnancies and births are better. Like we intervene when necessary, but like let it be. And when possible, let's just be proactive as we can. I think the issue is not with overdiagnosis. I think the issue is that we don't stratify our treatment approach to the case in front of us. Because a mild case of gestational diabetes does not need to be treated the same as a very severe case of gestational diabetes, where you're needing high doses of both insulin and medication to get blood sugar in check. This is probably an undiagnosed type 2 diabetes case that we caught in pregnancy. And like that has a whole different level of risk to mom and baby and a whole different level of necessity for medical management. Where a mild case, those individuals should just get something like my book or my online gestational diabetes course, and we may drastically improve their outcomes with very low cost interventions. It's literally minor shifts in their food intake, supplement strategies, exercise, how their like sleep hygiene is, and we can make dramatic improvements. So I think to like not diagnose the mild cases, it's unfortunate because these mild cases can predispose to other pregnancy complications. We have more polyhydramnios, we have more inductions, we have more C-sections, we have more preeclampsia, we have more preterm birth. And if we got the blood sugar in check with these very simple, inexpensive lifestyle tweaks, many of which are like free other than the cost of food, we could improve outcomes in those women and not be putting a strain on the healthcare system. So I just don't think our systems are set up well to like identify the varying like risk factors and like treat. Like it seems like a lot of providers, they just see gestational diabetes on the chart and it's like all the alarm bells go off, like they're counseling you on all the fear factor stuff of all these terrible things that are going to happen. You're given your one-page meal plan that's both restrictive but also excessively high in carbohydrates. It's like putting you on the medication insulin train. Like it's all just like, it's a hot mess. It's a hot mess with how it's managed in many clinical settings.
Yeah, I think that is indicative of a lot of women's health in our current healthcare system is that it's just a hot mess. The data is kind of there. We still have a lot of gaps. We're hoping for better data, but even that data takes 10, 20 years to get into clinical practice. And so, just as women, I think it's really important that we stay informed, we stay educated, we stay with open communication and a collaborative attitude with our providers. And when you're not receiving that same receptivity from your provider, highly consider changing providers, which, as always, I recognize that's not a choice for everyone across our nation right now with all of our maternity care deserts. But if you do have that opportunity, please think about changing to somebody who is more receptive and open and collaborative with you. And if that's not an option, maybe you do find a dietitian or a nutritionist in your area that specializes, or online. There are so many people like Lily who will work with you and have resources that can help you take charge of your health. Lily, truly, this has been such a great conversation. I'm so appreciative of you. And I have just one last thing. If there was one misconception or piece of misinformation that you feel like you want people to walk away with the correct information, what would that be?
I think in this case, especially after the last question, I would say gestational diabetes diagnosis does not mean that your pregnancy is going to go south, like something is going to go wrong. In fact, I get quite a few messages and emails from women who feel like gestational diabetes was actually a blessing in disguise because with, again, these very minor changes to their diet and lifestyle, they feel like 100 times better than they did before. They have more energy. I had one lady, somebody just sent me, I posted it on my Instagram stories the other day, a screenshot of like a Reddit post. I'm not on Reddit, but someone had made this post that they got diagnosed with gestational diabetes only like a week or two prior, and now they don't feel pregnant anymore because they don't have all the annoying symptoms of pregnancy. They were feeling tired and lethargic and had swelling and were puffy and their feet hurt and like all this laundry list of issues. And then by changing around their diet, better quality carbs, losing the sugar and the white flour products and bringing in more whole foods, they feel like a brand new person, right? And this has like carryover beneficial effects not only for the rest of your pregnancy, but also your baby's development, your recovery postpartum. So don't think that just because you got a diagnosis, everything is going to go wrong. Like the vast majority of cases are managed with diet and lifestyle. Even from the conventional standpoint, this isn't just me saying this, even like in all the conventional guidelines, diet and lifestyle is the primary and first treatment that you're going to try before medications. So it is often very manageable in that way. And it doesn't mean that you're going to have an adverse birth outcome or baby is going to be harmed. So I just want to like give a positive spin. Like if you do put the effort in, you will reap the rewards and it won't necessarily be a negative thing.
I love that so much. Oh my gosh, Lily, you're such a wealth of knowledge. You are someone I've looked up to for many years. I share your book with everybody, Real Food for Pregnancy, just for people who are pregnant, but especially when we have clients or I have friends or family members that get diagnosed with GD, I am so quick to recommend your book. I think it is just such a powerful resource for, like I said earlier, empowering people and keeping them informed and giving them education and information that maybe seems a little hard to get your hands on otherwise because it's not super duper mainstream. And I do think that a lot of these conversations, when they're brought to providers, may not be met with as much receptivity or eagerness to have this conversation as a lot of us would hope. And I think your book does a really great job of bridging that gap. So thank you so much for being here today. If people wanted to connect with you, learn from you, grab your book, grab your course, where can people do that?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me and the great questions and kind words on my work. So, the main place to find me is my website, lilynicholsrdn.com. There is a tab for books that links out to where you can buy my books. Again, Real Food for Pregnancy, I would say if you're pregnant, get that book. If you happen to get diagnosed with gestational diabetes, you can add on Real Food for Gestational Diabetes. It's a separate book, and that one really focuses just on gestational diabetes management, whereas Real Food for Pregnancy covers like a lot more information and is a much bigger book and a denser read. But I do in Real Food for Pregnancy have information on like gestational diabetes testing and the pros and cons of different screening options and some tips on GD prevention. But for the management aspect, you'd want Real Food for Gestational Diabetes. If you are not currently pregnant, I would recommend Real Food for Fertility. This is really the like nutrition Bible for women and keeping our hormones optimized. It's even a good choice if you're between pregnancies, you're out of the initial postpartum period and thinking about having another baby in the next 6 months or year or so. I would do Real Food for Fertility. And even if you're done having babies, it's still a good choice because your fertility is simply a reflection of optimal health and optimal hormone levels. So even as you ease into the perimenopause stage, maybe we still want to keep our hormone production up as long as our body allows us, right? So you can find the links to all those over at lilynicholsrdn.com/books. As far as like other educational resources, my blog is free. That's linked out right on my site. There's hundreds of articles. I alluded to one on gestational diabetes subtypes that you could read about on there. For professionals, I do mentor professionals via the Institute for Prenatal Nutrition. We run a group of mentees once a year. It's an application-only program for healthcare practitioners. So if that's of interest, that's linked out on my site, I think under the services tab. If you do have gestational diabetes and you feel like you need support beyond what's in my book, I do have an online course for gestational diabetes as well. That's linked out on my site. So check it out. There's tons of things. There's a freebies tab with free resources. I got a free video series on gestational diabetes. I mean, I've been at this for a while, so there's like a lot of resources, most of them pretty low cost or free, all available on my site. And then as far as social media land, you're most likely to find me on Instagram. And my handle's the same as my website, which is Lily Nichols RDN.
I told y'all she's a wealth of knowledge, you guys. Check her site out. And you guys, really, I want to echo what Lily said in the end, is that just because you are diagnosed with GD does not mean that your birth is now spiraling out of control, or that you are doomed, or that you are destined to have a terrible birth experience, or one that you didn't want. Our team sees people with gestational diabetes all the time, and they still have amazing, empowered, grounded births exactly how we planned. And a lot of it is because they stay informed and they're willing to do the work, and they have these collaborative communication discussions with their providers to make sure that their needs are still being met and that they are receiving individualized care. All right, you guys, I'll see you in the next episode. Be sure to follow Lily on social media, and you can find me at Tranquility by HeHe and at the.birth.lounge. Until next time, head to your app store and download the Birth Lounge app for evidence-based childbirth education and data-driven postpartum support delivered straight to your phone. Bye. Thank you so much for tuning in today. I love hanging out with you, and it is an honor to be your go-to gal when it comes to preparing for your baby. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please leave a 5-star review and tell others why they should be listening to the Birth Lounge podcast too. You deserve to have a birth that you love with a provider that values your autonomy and respects informed consent without all the trauma that you so commonly hear about on social media. New episodes air every Wednesday and Friday. Hit that follow button so you never miss an episode. I'm HeHe, and this is the Birth Lounge Podcast.